Hi everyone, this is Osawul podcast, and I'm Andrew Best, Chief Marketing Officer of Osawul, and today we are going to talk about the emerging social media networks and their influence on the big brands. Today, our guest is Jared Meade. Jared Meade is a public relations strategist with over 2 decades of experience helping brands, local to global, navigate complex communications challenges and build reputations that inspire trust. A founder of Rayne Strategy Group and creator of the PR ethics movement, his work has earned recognition from ICCO, Davos Communications, Hermes Creative Awards, and Toledo Press Club. Hi, Jared. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, how are you?
It's nice to meet you today, and I think we can start from the first question. So, what is the role of the emerging social media networks in affecting the reputation of big companies? So, what is their role right now? Because we have Reddit, we have TikTok, we have Telegram, and we,
Mhm.
I think, don't have enough clue of what is the effect of these social media networks on a big channel, on a big brand. So,
Yeah.
what is your take on that?
Well, I think what we're seeing is that social media, there's been a lot of studies that have come out saying that most people are now getting their news, their information from social media instead of mainstream uh, or traditional media. And so I think what we're seeing is kind of this shift of power away from traditional media and from those media gatekeepers towards kind of that real-time public discourse that you're getting on social media. And so that discourse and just that conversation that people are having is having a big influence on the narratives that are being kind of passed around when it comes to organizations, people in high profile positions, CEOs, whatever it might be. And so I think we're seeing that, first of all, we're seeing that shift where we're really having to see or take a look at what's being said on social media a lot more than what's being said in traditional media because of that kind of fast pace amplification that's happening. With that said, I think social media has accelerated that kind of that speed and amplification of information. So something is being said, something is being kind of maybe it's an accusation, whatever it might be, when it comes to crisis communication or issue management. And so before there's really even time for people to really dive into or investigate what's happening, that conversation has already taken off. So we're seeing that. And so we really have to be looking at social media just because of the speed of the way things are happening and the conversations that are taking place. We really have to make sure that we have a kind of a handhold on what's happening because they get away from us quite quickly. And I would say with that, what we're seeing is that the public, when they do get this information, not only are they consuming that information, but they tend to then take that and they're investigating that. We'll see maybe a high profile individual is going through an issue or a crisis, and then all of a sudden you see these social media influencers that are then digging into their background, their past, seeing what else is out there. So there's that investigation piece, and so then they'll start challenging the narratives that they've been told or that was kind of mainstream. And then once they have that, they're resharing that, and then that becomes part of the conversation. So it's really just this much more of a deep dive from the public sector than maybe you'd see in traditional media, where they would just read a story or hear a story on the news and kind of take that, and that's kind of the story that they're sharing. They're now kind of doing their own deep dive into it. And the last thing I'll say about it, I think with social media, is that people are expecting and calling for more authenticity from our brands and our brand leaders. Um, if they see a brand that is kind of seems to be performative or what they're putting out there is misaligned with their values or what they say that they stand for, people are much quicker to kind of jump on the bandwagon and to start what's the word I'm looking for? Maybe a backlash of speaking
Mhm.
about this company or this person not being genuine or loyal to what they say that they stand for. So I think there's all these things happening with social media, and it's happening so fast that really any company or anyone who's in the public eye really needs to keep a handle on, or at least be listening to what's being said online.
Yeah, totally agree with you. And talking about these narratives that actually dwell on social media, not all of them take huge audiences or huge impact. but still they are being reimbursed from time to time. They just appear again and again, and it seems like big brands don't pay attention to this. So how much should be a narrative big so so that the company actually pays attention to it? Or is it like there is no need to monitor any minor narratives, or is it only just big narratives that should be monitored by big companies?
Sure. I think that organizations, when I say we, I mean organizations, those of us in the public relations industry need to be monitoring everything that's being said as much as possible online. And then I think what we need to do is to build our response around um, kind of the reality of the situation, the level of the situation. So what I mean by that is if it's kind of a low level noise, something that's really not taking off, but you see people here and there posting about it, it may not be something that you need to respond to, but you need to at least monitor it. Sometimes responding to something, if it's at a low level, will actually tend to amplify it. You don't want to do that either. So I think you really just have to start looking at things at kind of what level is this conversation happening. I think you also need to look at how is this conversation hitting our target audience? So, in other words, is our target audience listening to it? Even if it's a low level conversation, kind of see where that sits. And then again, if it becomes a legitimate concern, the conversation is growing, and you see more people talking about it, and there is some legitimacy to what's being said. I think then you get to the point where you need to acknowledge the situation, clarify what happened or what is happening, and then if need be, commit to how the organization is going to change or make sure that whatever that incident was doesn't happen again in the future. So again, to answer your question, I think it really depends on the level of of the story or the communications happening on social media. I'm not one of those people who say, "Oh, these are just the haters, so we don't really need to listen to them. They're just,
Yeah.
they're the bots." Even if they are the bots, I think, we've learned that even, when bots are kind of amplifying a story, that it can take off and really cause an organization issues. I'll give you one example, and this is more of a U.S. based example, but you and
Mhm.
some of your audience may have heard this, but the Cracker Barrel restaurant, I don't know if you heard about that happening. So they got a lot of backlash because they changed their logo and were kind of changing the dining experience that people had come to appreciate and love. And now that they're looking back on it, because they got a lot of backlash at the time, they ended up reversing all their decisions. They're saying, through the research, that a lot of that amplification that was happening was actually bots that were happening online.
Oh,
And that kind of amplified the conversation. The thing that I think we need to understand, though, is even in that, the initial kind of reaction, the initial concern by their core audience, their core customer, was very real. And that conversation was happening. But of course, as we know, these bots will try to find something that's happening online and then try to amplify. And that's what happened. So I don't think people should look at it, those types of situations, and say, those were just bots. We don't need to worry about that. That's not truly what people believe because there was a truth to it at its core, and their customers were upset about it, but it just amplified much bigger than maybe it would have been had it just been those customers who were making those claims or those grievances that they had. So again, it's kind of tricky, but that's why I think we always need to be listening because we need to understand the conversation that's happening, understand how it's affecting that core demographic that we're reaching out to and that is our core audience.
totally agree with you. An example is very great. And actually shifts me towards the question that what kind of threats should be monitored more? Because we have reputational threats, and they
Mhm.
can be like minor reputational threats, but there are can be legal threats, and legal threats might have not big impact on social media, but still they can have a legal conditions that actually bring you to the court or something like that. So,
Mhm.
what do you think? Are there any kind of specific types of threats that should be monitored, whether they are minor or they are big threats? Is there any types of that?
hmm Um, again, in my opinion, I don't know that there's any one type of issue or potential threat that could be happening to a reputation online that we need to kind of focus on. I really think it's just keeping an eye on the conversation that's happening, no matter what that conversation is, no matter how low level or maybe high level legitimate concern it might be. I think it's really just a matter of understanding that all the conversations that are happening about a brand or person, if that may be the case, to understand what the public is saying, and also to understand what is causing the conversations to happen. I think a lot of times people automatically dismiss something because the concern may seem either not legitimate or really something that we're like, that's not really a big deal. I'll give you another example. And I've talked to the Cracker Barrel example, and this one I've talked about both on social media.
Yeah,
But a couple of years ago, a prominent, again, not sure if you guys will recognize the name, but a prominent news anchor here in the US, his name is David Muir. He was doing a live spot from the LA wildfires that were happening. And he started on social media to get a little bit of flack because as he was doing his live reporting, he happened to turn in such a way that it showed that someone had taken a clothespin and pinned the back of his coat so that it looked like it fit better. And a lot of people were saying, "Oh, these are just the trolls online who are getting upset, and it's not a big deal, and that this is something in the entertainment and news industry that they do all the time." Just to make sure that their coats aren't moving for the sound, the mics, and just to make sure everything looks the way it should, which is all legitimate. But I think what people were not realizing was that what some people were upset about was not that they had pinned his coat, but that had been a concern in the midst of the wildfires taking away people's livelihoods and their homes. And again, I don't think if you look at him and his reputation, I don't think he took a big hit with that. It kind of died down after a couple of weeks. But I think it's those types of things when people just automatically discount them and say, oh, that doesn't matter. These aren't people that we should be listening to. And we fail to realize that over time, little conversations like that, which at the time may not seem like a big deal, can start to build a public reputation, and start
yeah,
to create this narrative. So, for example, David Muir, great, news anchor, great reporter. I followed him for many years, but he, even before this, has started to kind of get this reputation of, um, I'm not quite sure how to explain it, but that he's very concerned about how he looks on camera and the way and so he's already kind of got that reputation. So when these things happen, again, does it make him a bad reporter? No. Does it mean, that his reputation is going to fall apart? No. But again, it just starts to create this public narrative that when these things start happening over and over and over again, people start to believe, okay, he's not really in it for the news. He wants to be seen and he likes, wants to look a certain way. So again, I use that example to say, was the clothespin that a huge incident that really mattered or affected his reputation in the long run? No. But was it a conversation that he and his bosses at ABC should have been listening to say, okay, people are getting the opinion that, we're caring more about how the news reporting looks, not the fires that are happening behind us. Yes, that's something, it's a legitimate concern. It's something that you should listen to. So I use that example to say, even if it is just, people online finding something to be upset about, because we all know that happens sometimes, that there's just people out there that like to kind of stir the pot. Try to look deeper at what could be bringing up that conversation, what could really be spurring those feelings in people. Because a lot of times I think you'll find a legitimate concern that is easily fixable, and him and his producers did. So the next few broadcasts that he did about the wildfires, people pointed out that he no longer had the clothespin on his jacket. I mean, a simple
yeah.
change. He didn't have to come out and make a statement. He didn't have to make a big deal out of it. They just made that change and people moved on. So again, I think that's why even at the low level, you kind of listen to the conversations just to see, is there something legitimately that we could change or do better?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And actually, it brings me to the a next question about right strategy when these threats emerge. So we've talked about monitoring and reacting to the threats, but what else can company do when they see these narratives online and they just know that this is a low noise right now, but maybe in the future it can be a huge noise and etc. What they can do about these narratives that appear on emerging social networks.
Sure. And again, I think it's all going to depend on what type of situation it is, how severe it might be. I'm trying to think of a couple of examples. Back in 2017, and I apologize that most of these examples are going to be US based.
Yeah.
But back in 2017, an airline here in the US, United Airlines, had an issue where a video was circulating on social media that a passenger was forcibly, and when I say forcibly, they were literally dragged off of the plane because the plane had been overbooked and this passenger didn't want to give up their seat. And this went viral. And at the time, I think United Airlines didn't really take it as seriously as they should have. They didn't respond in the right way. So when you have something like that, I mean, a customer literally being dragged off a plane, that to me is a pretty big deal. To me, that's where you have to, kind of acknowledge a situation, explain what's happening, share with your core customers, what are you going to do better? How are you going to make sure this never happens again? But then I also think you have things that are happening online that could potentially harm the reputation of an organization, but also may not. So, not sure if you're aware of this, but Jet2 holidays, which is something
Yeah.
over in Europe that they have. So there's that viral meme that's been going around since
Yeah.
last year, where whenever someone has kind of this weird or crazy travel experience, they put their jingle over the video of it. And so when you look at that, initially, that could harm Jet2's reputation because it's connecting their name to all these travel mishaps, which for a holiday or travel company is not something that they necessarily want. But I think also all those videos were kind of done in the spirit of fun. They weren't malicious; they were just supposed to be funny. And again, I haven't really dove real deep into the response here, but from what I have seen, when that was happening, JetBlue kind of leaned into it. And I believe they offered, it was kind of a competition where they were offering money for people to travel if they made these videos and different things. So again, you have something there that they could have seen this as, oh, this is really going to harm our reputation and kind of jumped in and threw out a statement and made a big deal out of it. Or they could have done what they did, which was they saw it as, okay, people are just having fun. So let's lean into it a little bit. And that's what they did. So again, I think it's really understanding why the conversations are happening. Because again, from what I've read, when that kind of social meme was going around, if I understood correctly what I was reading, but the U.S. White House had used that same meme when they put out some videos about some deportations. Now,
Mm.
once you add that element into it, okay, now that's kind of taking it in a different direction. And JetBlue actually did issue a statement that they did not approve that being used and that they didn't stand behind what the videos were for. So, again, same situation, but kind of two different avenues. And they took two different approaches. One they leaned into, the other they really felt like they had to make a statement and a stand. So I think to your point, it really depends on the situation of how you're going to respond to it. And I think that's why we have to always be listening to the conversations that are being had. Because if we wait till the conversation is kind of already in full force, we're kind of behind, and then we're kind of stuck of figuring out what it is that we need to do. And by that point, you've probably already taken a reputation hit if it's a pretty big concern.
Yeah, and it's actually a great example of Jet to Holidays because it just was this jingle was all around the place, and everybody used it for fun. And yeah, this is actually what brought my attention to Jet to Holidays. What is that about?
Right.
So
Well, and they actually did say there was a little bit of research or kind of a look back after that was happening, and they said it actually did increase the searches of JetBlue and what they were about in the company. So in the end, it probably did more good for their reputation and their brand than negative. So.
Yeah, totally agree with you. And it brings us to another question. So, what are the effective tools to monitor such threats? Like, do we need any people in place, processes in place, or should big companies just outsource this monitoring because it's just too clumsy, too cumbersome for them to monitor all of this in-house? What do you think about that?
So again, I think it depends maybe on the size of the organization or the size of the public relations communications staff in the organization. As you mentioned, there's a lot of tools out there. Um, I'm trying to think off the top of my head. There's Muckrack, there's Brand 24, there's Brand Watch, there's Mention, and I know there's probably, 1,000 more out there. And really, if you choose to use one of those platforms, it's really just looking into what fits best of what you're kind of looking into because they all are a little different. One thing that I will caution, and I've been thinking about this a lot lately because I belong to a large group of PR professionals, and we kind of will run things past one another, issues if we're trying to work through an issue just to get some feedback. And I had a colleague ask a question about a potential issue that was happening with a client. And one of the people in this group responded with, "Oh, I use such and such a platform. I fed it all the information. It tells me that it's not really a big deal. Don't worry about it." And part of me sees, with AI and everything that's happening, part of me sees, okay, having kind of that feedback, having a tool that will kind of search the internet and look at sentiment is always very helpful. But I think people have to realize that that should just be kind of the foundational piece. Because if you've ever used any of these social monitoring tools, even in the sentiment piece, if you go through and look at the different articles and broadcast pieces that it's judged, 9 times out of 10, it may be wrong because it's judging it based on the wording. I'll give you an example. Years ago, I had a client that was in the higher education space and they were using a hashtag NCC stigma. So it was for End Community College Stigma. Well, the social media monitoring tool that we are using would flag most of the broadcast and print pieces that were written on this story as negative because it had the word stigma in it. Well,
Mhm.
none of those stories were bad. That was the hashtag we used. So again, there's all these pieces and parts that these platforms may not be reading the information correctly. So I think it's important to remember that. Um, and also to remember that these tools are not going to flag, why people care about this. Like, why are people
Yeah.
upset or why are they not upset? It's not going to tell you necessarily who's driving the conversation. Um, and it's not really going to necessarily tell you whether this is kind of a issue or if it's a mainstream issue. So again, I think if we're using these platforms, if we're using any sort of AI, it should be kind of that baseline foundational piece where, okay, let's see what the platform is saying. Now let's take that and let's do a deeper dive. And for that, you need that human piece. You need someone who's going to be able to look into it, read the articles, look at the broadcast, look at the social media posts, and really see, for instance, with the Cracker Barrel example I gave, they're looking back now and saying, okay, most of it was bots. But when you dig deeper, you see that there was this core group of customers and people who were loyal to the Cracker Barrel brand, excuse me, who were bothered by the changes. So it wasn't
Yeah.
just the bots. So if someone had used a platform or somehow just did that cursory view and said, okay, these are bots, let's not worry about it, they really would have missed the heart of the conversation and why people were bothered by the changes.
Yeah, totally agree with you. And my last question would be, what are your predictions for the future? Because we have so many emerging platforms like Blue Skies, Red One, another. So it seems like every day we have another platform emerging all of the time. And what is the future of these platforms? How it will change our perception of narratives? How will it change the industry? Should we monitor all of them, or should we just concentrate on mainstream, old-fashioned, and already known? platforms. What is your take on that?
So yeah, I agree with you. It seems like every day there's a new social media platform, and it's getting
Yeah.
harder and harder to keep up with, where everyone's at. Um, I think if you have the ability to monitor all of them, all the power to you. I think that'd be great. I don't know too many organizations or too many people that have the ability to monitor every social media platform out there, especially when new ones are happening all the time. I think if an organization is looking at, okay, where should we be listening? I think you really have to think through who your core audience is. Where are they at? If you skew to a much younger audience, it may be TikTok and Instagram and Reddit. If you're skewing towards an older audience, it may be Facebook. It may be X, which I still call Twitter. I can't get myself to call it X. But it just really depends. And again, it may depend on kind of your audience. Where do they lean politically? Where do they fit economically? So those are just really things you have to look at and then decide based on who your core audience is, where are they at? Where are they having these conversations? Um, I tend to think for most things, um, Reddit, TikTok, um, I know a lot of people are kind of going away from using X for various reasons, but I still think it's a good one to monitor because there's still a lot of
Yeah.
conversations going on there. And I think even if you don't agree with the people who are having the conversations, it's still something you need to hear so you know what's being said. And to some extent, still Facebook. I don't know if it's quite as maybe heavily used or as popular as it once was, especially for a younger audience. But I think those are where you tend to see, excuse me, when a lot of issues pop up on social media, it's usually things like TikTok, Reddit, where these are popping up. So I would suggest at least monitoring those two, if nothing else.
Thank you, Jared. Thank you.
Yeah, of
This is
course.
this is it was an amazing session with you today. And everyone who is listening to us, please subscribe to our channel or our newsletter to be tuned in and know more about our podcasts and about our guests. Thank you, Jared.
Of course.